Bard's not in the habit of doing video responses, but I thought this one at least deserves some comment and criticism. So I want to discuss pretty much directly with you why you think these critical hits aren't good enough. Because it seems to me, and it seems to a lot of other people, that they're pretty much alright the way they are.
Today we'll be talking about critical hits and a suggestion I have to make them more significant, more impactful, more memorable.
What could possibly go wrong?
However, when it comes to the mechanics side, I would say 5th edition critical hits are rather lackluster. In previous editions, you would not only add the damage bonus twice, so for example, if your longsword had 1d8 plus 5, your critical hit would be 2d8 plus 10, so it would feel more significant that way.
Critical hits in 5th edition absolutely do feel significant when you get them. I mean, there are some new classes out there which allow you to roll additional bonuses when you get a critical hit. There are fighter variants that allow you an increased critical hit threat chance. And of course, on top of that, there are weapons that have improved bonuses when you get critical hits. You have races that have improved critical hits, such as orcs. And, you know, even more so than that, you've got the core classes themselves, which benefit from higher critical damage, considering things like the Battle Master, which is one of my favourite classes. All those superiority dice will be increased, and more so than that is the Rogue. The Rogue's dice will be massively increased. This is actually the example that's used on page 196 of the Player's Guide, so it's absolutely a relevant attack.
What we have in 5th edition right now is double damage dice. Don't add the extra bonus, all weapons work the same. And I agree with that approach of simplicity. I'm not looking to add more rules or weapon properties or anything like that, but I find critical hits really lackluster. To roll an additional die, and most of the time the critical damage is less than the regular hit. Now, all added together, it is a bit more.
So is it more or is it less?
I think it needs to be spiced up so that when you critically hit, you get really excited about the possibility.
I don't think the critical hit should be the be-all and end-all when it comes to combat. People just get excited when they roll that natural 20, sure, but it shouldn't really be a defining characteristic of the game. You mentioned during your video that there are huge amounts of hit points for the monsters. Well, yes, you want to cut through them, but surely having all those additional hit points shouldn't just be a factor for, you know, your critical hit rolls. It should be a factor of, well, there's so many hit points I've got to cut through. Shouldn't I be taking advantage of certain feats, like, you know, the power attack equivalent feat? What is it, a Great Weapon Fighter? Or perhaps you should be moving on to things like, different spell effects that you can use, or even taking advantage. I'll use the Battle Master as an example again of, like, say, the pushing attack, so that you can keep the monster back. For these large hit point creatures, you're going to have to employ specific tactics. But then again, you know this already. I know this. Everyone watching knows this. The fact remains, however, is these monsters get put in place as such so that it can reward the players for using advanced and, unorthodox and unusual tactics.
And I'm going to introduce this here, that when a player critically hits, they'll roll their damage dice as normal, they'll double the damage die as normal, but if they get the maximum number on one of those dice, they can roll again. If they get the maximum number at that time, they can roll again. Again and again and again, as many times as it explodes.
Action dice, like they use in Spycraft. Over in Spycraft, you only have a specific number of these action dice that you can use. So you only get the chance to do that maybe 3, 4, 5 times, and that's all dependent on your character level. Then there's the fantasy flight games such as Deathwatch, Black Crusade, Only War. These have a similar mechanic whereby if you roll a critical hit, or a Righteous Fury as they like to call it, if you do get a 10, you get to roll that up again and again and again if you keep getting 10s. Not something that's necessarily that easy to do, but on top of that, you still need to make your attack roll again and still confirm the hit. Even in 3rd edition, you had to confirm your critical hit roll. It's a rule that sometimes got ignored, but it was actually one that was worth putting in for various reasons. What you're advocating for here is to get additional bonuses on critical hits for no other reason than because I want better critical hits, without really taking into account, or it appears though you haven't really taken into account, additional things like weapons that are enchanted, special abilities like sneak attack, racial abilities. I mean, I could be wrong. You might have thought of all of this stuff and thought, no, they still need to be even higher. So I'll give you an example in a minute of how this might be a problem, and we'll go from there.
So for example, the longsword does a d8. A critical hit would do 2d8. You roll, one of them's a 5, one of them's an 8. So now you're at 13. You'd take that 8 and roll it again. You get a 7, so the total is now 20. A critical hit feels critical. It feels impactful, and a lot of excitement comes out when everyone at the table is looking and eager to see, will they explode? And one more thing, a very, very small thing, but something I'll just throw in with this because it's relevant with this idea, and that is the great sword versus the great axe. And with the great sword, you have 2d6 damage, which means that if the critical die happens, you'll have 4 dice with the possibility of exploding. The great axe does a d12 by the book. I make a very small change. I don't see any reason why a great sword should be more effective than a great axe, so I offer the players the opportunity, if they want to use 2d6 for the great axe, they can, and that helps just in a little way, especially with the exploding dice mechanism for critical hits.
Well, I suppose I should thank you for that, because you've done a little bit of my work for me. But the point I want to make here is you've actually just given us the reason as to why you shouldn't use the exploding dice, and I'll show you right now. I use this example a lot, but it is still quite relevant. So a great axe does 1d12 damage. Now, under the normal critical hit rules, if you get a critical hit, you'll get 2d12 damage. But if we go to page 41 and the description under savage attacks and quote, when you score a critical hit with a melee weapon attack, you can roll one of the weapon's damage dice one additional time and add it to the extra damage of the critical hit. This results in 3d12 damage, as opposed to the same character who would be using a greatsword, who would thereby do 5d6 damage because they're only getting to roll the 1 dice. So what the great axe does is it allows for some big critical hits in the right hands, and what the great sword does is it allows for more consistent damage. So instantly you have a potential to do a minimum of, say, 20 damage with one single strike from a great sword using a battlemaster tactic. This would result in 20 damage there and then before you apply anything else to it. Under the normal critical hit rules, that would then go up to 40 damage potential, because you get to roll all the dice again. So 2d6 for the great sword, and then a d8 for the superiority dice, and then that will be doubled up again. So you get where I'm coming from. But I would like you to think about the concept of, say, a fighter rogue. Level 1 fighter, maybe a level 7 rogue. Now, it's actually a popular build, and it has been for a long time. But consider this. All those dice from your sneak attack, which have the chance to explode. All those dice from your superiority and from your weapon. Now, this is going to sound like a bit of metagaming, and I apologize for that. But if you look at page 72, where it says Great Weapon Fighting, when you roll a 1 or a 2 on a damage dice for an attack you make with a melee weapon that you're wielding in 2 hands, you can re-roll the dice and must use the new roll, even if it's a 1 or a 2. So with that, on top of your sneak attack, because the two aren't separated, you can actually use the two things together. There's no deliberate rule that says you can't do that, but because of the way it's worded, you do get to have that advantage. Then under your system, every time you get a 6, it would be rolled up again. So what's happening is we've got 1 and 2, which is being ignored the first time round, then a 6, which you have a higher chance of getting on the reroll, and then all those dice are going to be re-rolled. And because they're being re-rolled, the Great Weapon Fighting ability from the fighter or paladin or whoever you're playing as procs again, and then those get to be re-rolled. What you would need to do as a DM would be to then say, okay, roll your dice for your weapon, roll your dice for your superiority dice, roll your dice for your sneak attack, then apply the bonuses from the great weapon fighting style to get the rerolls on that. Then you'd have to separate the sixes out. Then you'd have to allow those to be rolled up again, and then cap how many times the great weapon fighter would be allowed to use the 1-2 reroll mechanic, because you're going to have so many dice just going again and again and again. And then once all that's been sorted out, you've then got to take into account, well, has my player picked the Savage Attacker feat? Because they then would get to just say, okay, I'll make a note of how many I've rolled, and then they get to re-roll all of that damage a second time, applying all the same rules, and then they get to choose how much damage they want to apply. That's going to take ages to do, and I mean a hell of a long time to do. Then you've got the rest of their attacks in a round. So if you've got, like, say, a character like a paladin, they might have 2 attacks at best, but a fighter can have like 4 or 5 with the right weapon setup. So again, what you're advocating for could speed up combat, but if you don't think about these other little bits here, there, and everywhere, dotted around the book, you're going to find that your combat is going to take actually a lot longer, because you've got one character basically doing all this dice rolling while everyone else just sits around going, guys, can I have a turn?
As a community, we benefit a lot when we work together, where we share differing points of view but do so in a civil way. That's what these comments are for. I'd encourage you to use them as such, because I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this subject.
You're absolutely right. We do benefit when we work together. So this is my opinion on it, and this is why I would personally be against something like what you're advocating for. When you take into account something like 2d6 for a great sword, plus your superiority dice, plus bonuses for your strength, plus bonuses for enchantment, plus bonuses for great weapon master, as well as anything being affected on top of the character by another player, for example, you get some massive numbers in general. Critical hits don't need to be any crazier, because you're already dishing out so much damage. If you just think about how many dice a person is getting to roll or getting to re-roll, it does have a lot of potential to go horribly wrong, and it can actually result in taking out a player in a heartbeat. Bang, gone. So I would think really long and hard before implementing a rule such as this one, because if the players can use it, then the monsters will get to use it. And there's really, you can't have that double standard of not allowing it to one, then giving it to the other. So if you want to talk to me directly about it, if you've got some ideas of your own and you think, okay, I think you've misinterpreted this, or I think you've cherry-picked this here, or I think you're using the worst case scenario, whatever, then yeah, sure, I'm quite happy to talk about it. We're all gamers here at the end of the day, and we all want the best for not just our community, but for the people at our gaming table. So if you're interested, I'm quite willing to have a discussion about it. We can find out what's best for our gaming groups if you're up for it. So until that time, I will see you, and I will see the rest of you guys at the gaming table. Thanks for listening.